Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 39 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith, and I am one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is the woman who took my title of publisher of CUInsight, Lauren Culp. Lauren is the publisher and our first CEO at CUInsight.com, and in this episode we have a wide-ranging conversations about the issues affecting credit unions, like the war on talent, disruption, and how credit unions must adapt. We also talked about recruiting and developing young leaders and the benefits of a diverse workplace. You know, we even got her vision for the future of CUInsight. As always, we talk leadership and life hacks and have a lot of fun with the rapid fire questions. I was really excited to record this episode with Lauren and get the chance to share her with you, our community, letting all of you get to know her a little better like we have over the past couple months. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Lauren Culp. Enjoy. Lauren, welcome to the show and CUInsight.
Thank you, Randy.
This is going to be a lot of fun. I've had the chance to get to know you in the process of you not only becoming our first ever CEO at CUInsight, but also stealing my title as publisher.
Yep.
So I was excited for our listeners to get to know you too. And, you know, just to let them know what's ahead for CUInsight and for the credit union community. So like I said, I want to jump right in and have everybody get to know you.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, I'm excited to be here.
I think we all are. So you spent the past few years of your career at Filene running the cooperative trust. It's a question that I know you and I have talked about, but what are some of the biggest issues you see facing credit unions today?
You know, I had sort of a unique view because I was working with a lot of young leaders, but I will say also a lot of really established leaders who have been in their roles for a long time, coming in and giving a lot of their time and energy to help mentor and really share insights with those next generations. So I would say I have a unique perspective into some of the issues that I think we face. And we've heard a lot of them before. You know, it's nothing new. There's technology, there's talent, there's meeting consumer expectations, competing with the Amazons and the Googles of the world in user experience, but also maybe actually in actual banking soon. So if I had to sum up what I've heard and what I've observed, I think we have really two kind of key challenges. And the first one being, how do we adapt to change and how do we stay competitive? And, you can kind of see it like in nature, the animals that survive are the ones who can really adapt to change really well. And if they can't, a lot of times their species goes extinct. And so I'd say, similarly, we can learn a lesson from that. And I kind of understand that those of us who are able to adapt to change will be able to be successful. So how are we able to do that in a world that is changing so rapidly every day, faster and faster, I would say, too. And so the second kind of thing the second challenge that I think we have is really understanding ourselves, what our identity is, and understanding how to really effectively share that story. And so many people still don't know about credit unions. I spent about 5 years at a credit union myself, and a couple of times, probably a week, I had to explain to someone what the heck it was that I did. And, credit union is not a labor union, and it's not a credit collection agency. And so
Yep.
There's so many of those, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate. And so, as we keep telling the world who we are, I think it also takes really bold moves to back up our words and to stay relevant and adaptable, on par with what our members and potential members are expecting from us. And so when everything kind of really seems to be working fine and we, are hitting our targets and our goals, sometimes it's hard to justify taking those risks or making really, really bold moves. But we've all heard the Blockbuster story. They were celebrating one year and then pretty much out of business the next year. And so I would say we can't mistake our success now for success tomorrow.
I agree with you. There was something that was resonating with me a ton in the first part of what you were talking about, and the pace of change in our digital business, right? That changes so quickly.
Right.
And one of the reasons earlier in the year when David and I first started looking at, we've had 10 great years, but how do we have another 10 and keep that?
Right.
And what brought us to you was that idea of keeping setting up CUInsight to be able to keep pace with digital change and be able to bring that to credit unions. And a big thing for us, kind of letting people behind the curtain when we went through the interview process, and a lot of people applied for the job. With you, we felt like you got that too, right? Like where you just the conversations that we had during the interview process and even afterwards was that idea of like, we can be on top and still do better, or we can fall like Blockbuster or anything else. So, and some of the ideas that you had were completely different than anything we'd thought of before. And it's like, that's beautiful. Love it. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's something I know in your previous role, and you'll be doing it a lot going forward, and that we've done here at CUInsight is talk to people about change, and how fast it's moving. And I even think back to a few of the past podcast guests like Caroline Willard and stuff like that, talking about that pace, her coming from co-op to, now leading a trade association, and how fast credit unions have to move. One thing that you and I have talked about quite a bit as well, and it's been brought up on the show really rather recently by two of our friends, Tansley Stearns and Jill Nowacki. We've talked about the war for talent in credit unions. And to go to Tansley, like that idea of being an employer of choice, not like, as Jill said on the podcast, many of us just kind of fell into credit unions and we're like, we love it once we got here, but it wasn't like we grew up like, hey, we want to be in credit unions. You mentioned you've worked with a lot of young professionals and some, just great people that you see as young leaders. What can we do, or what do you see as kind of maybe being that missing piece where, young people are graduating from college and they're looking at credit unions as a career, like a preferred career choice? Right.
Similar to our need to adapt to consumer expectations, we have to adapt to kind of workforce and talent expectations. And those are changing too, just as rapidly. And, the bar is kind of always inching up higher and higher. And maybe an inch is the wrong, maybe it's like yards sticking up. The bar keeps going up so fast as we're seeing some of these really big organizations, the Googles and the Facebooks, who are changing the way that their workforce can interact with them. And we're competing as employers too, and thinking about how do we measure up when we're looking at other employers. And I tell the story sometimes of my grandfather, who worked his whole career at Sears, and he retired with a pension and benefits. And not only do you not see that these days, but in a lot of cases, it just doesn't make sense. We see, especially among younger talent, people are expecting to get a raise if they leave their job to go somewhere else. And sometimes they come back, but they come back at a much more significant pay increase than if they had just stayed and tried to work their way up that ladder. And so, not to mention, Sears' financial troubles, who knows what's going to happen to that pension?
The pension, yeah.
And is that the best route to go? And so sometimes, that's what talent is really, especially younger people, are really expecting, that they're not going to stay somewhere forever. And so I think they're just really evolving expectations from the people that we're employing. And they're coming in, and we've still got a lot of folks who have been at the credit union for 20, 25 years. And so we have to really think about them too, because there are some clashing expectations among our workforce. But what I would say is, it's not the ping pong tables, it's not the nap pod type perks that we need to worry about, although nap pods do sound really great.
They sound delightful.
So great. But when I think about, workplace strategy, and when we think about what our workforce strategy should be, I think that there are things that we can offer that no one else can offer, or the things that we have that are unique about us. And so I say we can't forget pay. Pay is important, but also, can we offer remote work? Could we take advantage of the gig economy that we see happening? I've even thought, what would a call center look like that operates with sort of like an Uber surge-based pricing model with a remote workforce, where you set your own hours, you log in when it's busy, you get paid more than when you're not needed. You can kind of, what would that look like? Is that something that credit unions could really tap into? And, I know you and Jill talk a lot about the idea of work-life integration, and I've heard it called work-life blend too. And we spend so much time at work, and, most people don't expect to work 40 hours anymore. They expect to work 50 or 60 or more. And so if that's what our life is going to be, no one really wants to feel like they have to compartmentalize. You don't stop being a mom just because you walk through the doors of the credit union. And, why would you, I think, you and Jill were talking, why would you take a position as a teller where you can't have your phone out when you could make just as much money as an Uber driver? Set your own hours, be there to take your kid to school. And there could be reasons why you would want to be a teller without having, those same flexibility pieces. And maybe it's the impact that you would have. Maybe it's the career pathing. If you stay at this organization, we're going to grow you. But those are questions that our potential employees have. And we've got to be really explicit about answering those things and really coming to them with that story. And, you and Tansley were talking too about the interesting kind of impact and the shift with marketing and HR kind of coming together. And so it's not just consumers who hear our message through our marketing, it's also potential employees, it's also our talent. And so I think that this synergy between HR and marketing, if done really well, can even better position us to be organizations where people want to work. And it comes back to telling our story. And so much of, what we're kind of trying to do comes back to that, because we have, I think, some opportunity to really do a good job. And right now, I think that people in the United States or around the world are still not sure instantly. Like, if I'm going to a grocery store, I know what it is.
Yep.
If I go to a credit union, I 50-50, maybe I do, maybe I don't. So I think when we can figure out how to do that really well, we will be able to even better be kind of that workplace that people want to stay.
I agree with you. It leads into something else that I know that you're passionate about from previous conversations, and a topic I like to kind of keep front and center on this show, and that's the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you were, in charge of the Crash program, and you were able to bring people in from all over the country, into the Cooperative Crush and into those events. Was there something that you did to make sure that everyone was represented? And I guess I'll leave it there just to start. Is there, something that you've had or that you've experienced in the past on how to make that work, being intentional about that?
It's so interesting. I'm not an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I am super passionate about it. And I would just be the first to admit that I don't know everything, and I'm always learning and striving for more. And so first and foremost, what I've learned experientially is that just being intentional and conscious about being inclusive and having diversity, that is like the best first step, is just being really intentional about that. And then from there, you can kind of lean into action, because it's not something that happens by accident. You don't go from a program that's not diverse to waking up the next morning, all of a sudden it's diverse, and you didn't do anything, It doesn't happen like that. And so for me, it was really important to have a diverse group in every Crash program. And, we did a dozen a year. And so there was a lot, but the most visible one by far is the Crash the GAC program. This past year, we took 100 young professionals to the GAC. And so it's really visible. And so that one was one where, that diversity, equity, inclusion was so important there, because it had a really big kind of platform. And so what I started with, we haven't always gotten a super diverse application pool. And I think it's incumbent upon us, it's our fault if the application pool isn't diverse. We can't say that people aren't applying. It's what are we doing that is not getting diverse applications? And so I think it's incumbent on us to invite and really work hard for diversity in the application pool itself to start with. And so that will lend itself to really diverse selections when we get a pool that is diverse. We've worked hard for that. So when I started planning, being intentional, I was telling people, I was telling, our internal team, I was telling the mentor team that this is what I wanted. And so when we were starting to try to figure out how to do this, we started at the top. And that was for us with this leadership or mentor team for the program. So there are 6 or 7 mentors of the program who are kind of going to be leading the group. And so when I was interviewing and selecting candidates for that, I started by making sure that that group was as visually diverse and skill set diverse, but also visually diverse as possible. And by sharing that out with the market as often as we could. And I didn't I didn't post on Facebook and say, we're diverse and we want diverse people.
No,
it's visual. Yeah. It's demonstrated by, sort of the action, and not just by paying lip service to it, but something that people can kind of see in action. And so as simple as we shared all the headshots of the mentor group, and that really started the ball rolling, because when people see themselves represented in a leadership team like that, we all are more likely to identify with that and apply for an opportunity like that. And so we really saw it trickle down to the candidates. It lent itself to a super diverse Crash group. And what's great is that it wasn't just diversity just to appear diverse. We saw it Absolutely. In action. There's so much strength in diversity. And this team, the mentor team that we started with, was probably the highest performing, most engaged team I've ever worked with. And I really believe that our diversity is what enabled us to kind of be that strong. And, if you've ever worked in a team where everyone is just so engaged, it's kind of this magic feeling where you're like, oh, I think we could take over the world, or we should start a credit union, or, whatever it is. And I think it's really those unique skill sets and perspectives that make us so much stronger. And we're really one key piece into having an engaged team. So if I can give another shout out to the importance of diversity, it really, you can kind of see the effects in everything.
I am right with you there. So is there a belief in credit unions today that you think will, just have to fundamentally change in the relatively near future for us to stay relevant?
The biggest thing I would say is that we can't stay complacent and think that what got us here will get us any further. And, we talked a little bit about that earlier. I think it really just is keeping our eyes open and knowing that change is happening, whether or not we want to be a part of it. We can kind of get swept away by it, or we can, be a real part of what's changing and stay relevant with consumers. And so I think, maybe in our industry, we don't always have the scale to be on the bleeding edge of what innovation is, but we do have to be ready and willing to adapt really nimbly and quickly, or else we may not be surviving into the 22nd century. So really important.
When Linda Bodie was on the show, she talked about all the cool stuff at their credit union that they don't have the huge budget. They're a small credit union, but finding the different, local sources and people with talent and all of that, it was cool. But I think that's the same way. And, we're a small business, so we always have to look for how can we do this? So
yes, exactly.
I want to keep the show moving along and get into the second part, the leadership and life hacks, have a little fun here with you, really let people get to know you better. What inspired you to apply for and now take the gig as publisher and CEO of CUInsight?
Yeah. Well, I will say, when you're interested in any job, typically or hopefully you do a lot of research about the role, the organization, would it be a fit? And in this case, what I found about CUInsight when I started looking was just so phenomenal. I love the collaboration. CUInsight is collaborating with different sources of news. They're collaborating with different credit union leaders and just so much collaboration. It was so cool to see the way that we're all kind of supporting one another. And a close second is really that constant innovation and the eye for what's next while still really executing well in the current state. And it was so cool to see those two sort of things represented so well in CUInsight. And I felt like, I thrive when I'm trying to bring ideas to life. And I have some ideas of my own, but my sweet spot is in how do we take an idea and make it actually happen? And so I felt like my skills would be a perfect match. I was just so inspired by the work you do. I ended up stealing your job title.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I love it. That. That's the part that has me so excited is your strength is one of my weaknesses. So it's that idea of I have all kinds of ideas, but the actual execution of them, sometimes I stumble because I see another squirrel. So, but it has
and that diversity is what makes us better.
Absolutely. No, I'm so looking forward to it. And it's been so enjoyable so far. It has, it's been a couple months now into the process. Has the inspiration at all changed now that you've, kind of seen behind the curtains, the ins and outs of the company over the past couple months?
If anything, I think I've just been constantly impressed by the team and what the team has really accomplished. And so I'm excited to be able to innovate for the credit union community and for our partners. But I'm also really excited to be able to support the CUInsight team and to really kind of continue the work that you started of putting those exact things we were talking about earlier into practice. Making it a great place to work, thinking about how do we compete as an employer? And so I'm excited both to really talk to the credit union community and to our partners and continue to innovate. But my inspiration is also to really support the team and make it a great place for them to work.
I love it. How would you, the team is probably very interested in this, and I know they've been getting to know you here recently too, but how would you describe your leadership style?
I would say I'm very collaborative. I, really strongly believe in the value of diverse teams, as I've mentioned so many times. And without kind of these different strengths and viewpoints and perspectives, I doubt that any of us out there could run a successful organization with 1,000 clones of ourselves. And so, if we're going to try that, if we have this diversity, it's a strength that we can use. And so the value in that is when you've got it, it's really in listening to it and kind of empowering those people, the smart, intelligent people you've hired to do their jobs. And so my leadership style is collaborative. I really invite feedback. I invite people to participate and share their own ideas and thoughts about things. So I'm excited to work with the team.
I was excited to ask you this question, or maybe intrigued is the right word, because we are kind of new in our working relationship. But is there something that, people that have worked with you in the past have heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
You know, what's funny, one of the things that I ask most actually is, what do you think? And when anybody brings me something, whether it's a problem or when we were working on the program with all the mentors for GAC, I most often tried to ask, what do you think, before I gave any feedback at all. I don't want to change their views or their perspectives or kind of color it in any way. And so as often as hopefully it is also a thank you. But what do you think is kind of the first thing that I try to lead with? And, open communication is so important. And I never want anyone to be afraid to challenge my perspective. I'm not the smartest person in the room and I know it. And, if I was, it's probably time to find a new room.
Right.
And so really, I always welcome those ideas and input. Lead with, what do you think? And invite that feedback.
I love it. Is there a mistake either that you've made or that you've seen, you just kind of see young leaders make over and over again?
Well, I've made a ton of mistakes, of course. I think that's part of learning and growing. And I've worked with a lot of young leaders. And I think many of us stick with what's comfortable. And this is true, I would say, even, whether you're young or not, many of us can stick with what's comfortable and not take a risk or step outside of our comfort zones, whether that's signing up for a new project, whether that's taking on a new role at the organization, whether, it's so easy to stay comfortable. And I think that is a mistake because there's so much that we can learn when we do step outside of our comfort zone. And if I had a close kind of second mistake, I would say that I've heard a lot of young leaders say, I'm not sure what this means, but I don't want to ask because I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm talking about or like I don't belong here or like I'm not intelligent. And so sometimes people don't ask these questions and maybe everybody else in the room is wondering the same question or, maybe you just are the only person who doesn't know, but there are so many people willing to support you and help you. And so I think sometimes too, the first step I think in being an authentic leader is just admitting what you do and don't know. And so as young leaders, I'm kind of always encouraging them to ask those questions, get to the bottom of these things that you're wondering about because other people might be wondering too.
I've mentioned it, I think, on the show before, but one of the most powerful lines, I guess you would say, that I learned probably not soon enough, but fairly early in my career was the idea of saying, I don't know, but I'll get back with you.
Yes.
And then going to find out. And no one's ever been like, oh, you don't know enough. It's just people respect, right. I don't know, but I'll figure it out for you. And as long as you follow up with them, then you follow through, then everybody loves you.
Yep.
So
exactly.
I think it goes along with what you're saying. I think that's pretty good stuff there. Has there been a memorable failure that comes to mind that really did lead to a future success? I would say the moment where at the time you wanted something maybe so badly and then afterwards you're like, I'm glad that didn't happen because this is amazing. Or this would have never happened,
Yes, actually, shortly before I headed to Filene as the leader of the cooperative trust, I had applied for a role internally at the credit union that I was working at. And I want to be really clear that the credit union is amazing. It's an amazing organization, really supportive leaders. But I applied for this role and I was turned down and they said, you're not ready. We think you need to wait a couple of years. And I thought back on that decision so many times and I'm so thankful that it happened that way. Otherwise I never would have taken the cooperative trust role. We wouldn't be on this podcast. And I wouldn't say that the credit union made a mistake either. They knew who they were looking for. I didn't fit the criteria. But through that process, I think I really learned to trust myself too, because when they said that I wasn't ready, I just remember thinking, that's not true. Like I am ready for something, something more. And maybe it's not the specific thing, but I know that there's something out there. And it was kind of that moment that I would say I first started to advocate for myself and not necessarily take no for an answer. And so it pushed me to apply for this role outside of my comfort zone. I moved to Madison. My life has changed for the better in so many ways. And it's kind of those uncomfortable places that we grow.
Absolutely. Yep. I have one of those stories myself where CUInsight would not exist if I would have gotten a promotion probably about a year and a half before it. So
interesting. We'll have to have you interview yourself on the podcast sometime.
I think that's going to be the end of the year, actually. I think Jill has an idea for that. So
love it.
Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received from somebody else that you find yourself going back to over and over?
Yes. So there's a book actually called Wolfpack by Abby Wambach. And if you haven't read it, you need to. And it is all about the importance of people, and especially women, but really all of us having a pack or like a wolf pack that supports us and that we support. And I read the Wolfpack book with a bunch of people who I would say are in my Wolfpack. And, I've been lucky enough to sort of stumble into this network of really incredible people. And it's such a gift to be able to support all of them however I can. And then in turn, they have supported me countless times through my career. And, it's so cool. It's this idea that, when one of us succeeds, we kind of all rise. It's not historically, you might have had to fight for the one seat at the table or whatever it was, but really this idea that in supporting somebody else, I'm also, supporting myself and lifting everyone up. And so that advice, the entire book, and actually it's not a long book. So if you want to read it, you can probably knock it out in about an hour, but that advice has been something that has stuck with me.
We will link to that for sure in the show notes. I have not read the book, so I like that.
Ooh, perfect.
Yeah. When you run into a wall, you just kind of come up against a problem. Is there any hacks or something that you do to kind of get to the other side? And, the first episode, Jim Nussel talked about playing the guitar. It's just, like sparking the creative mind to look at something. Is there something you do to look at things differently?
Yeah. The first thing that I usually do is kind of phone a friend or run the idea by other people and say like, am I missing something here? What are your thoughts? And if I still hit a wall after that, we hit a collective wall together, then I usually just put it down, walk away, stop thinking about it altogether. And, it's like sometimes you're too close to something. So I might go work out, go for a run, go outside, try to stop thinking about it. And then usually that's the best moment to kind of have that sort of, breakthrough thought.
So I have to ask, and I've asked this question before when people have talked about phoning a friend on the show, does the friend tend to be in credit unions, or do they tend to be somebody with a completely outside perspective? Is there a combination? I mean...
Ooh, good question. I have a couple, I would say maybe 75% are in credit unions, okay, and then 25% are not. And I get sometimes the inside credit union perspectives are more directly applicable because they kind of get the environment. And then those outside of credit union perspectives are so helpful because they're like, well, why the heck do you call it a share account or, whatever it is? And it's like, oh, yeah.
I remember Maurice Smith on the podcast talking about him going to his dad, who was a farmer.
Oh, interesting.
But he would ask him stuff, and he was like, he said it was just an outside perspective that more times than not, it helped him get past something, even though, it's because it was almost simplifying it because he wasn't in the business. Right. So, absolutely. There's a question, and it's one that I enjoy asking people, but when you think about keeping the message fresh, like how do you as a leader plan on keeping the message fresh to the team at CUInsight? And then much broader, but how do you plan on keeping CUInsight's message fresh to the credit union community?
Yeah, there's this sort of balance between a consistent message and then a fresh spin on that. And sort of like the bones of the message are the same, or I even think about sometimes like a phone, like my phone case changes a lot more rapidly than my phone does. And my phone gets updates every so often, but the phone case I'm constantly changing out because I kind of get bored with one color. And so I think it's all about kind of keeping consistent what needs to be consistent, but then how do we find new ways to spice it up and really knowing your audience too, and kind of empathizing with those people, crafting a message in a way that resonates best with them. And stories are so incredible. They're this kind of backdoor to our mind where we start forming an emotional connection to the idea or to the message. And so making sure that the message is told in a way that the listener will understand and really resonate with. And so it's not even just like what's in it for me, but it's like what's in this message that matters to me.
You used one of my favorite words, empathy. I think we need more of that in this world. So if you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge? What does that, work-life balance or integration look like to you? I know you were just out at Red Rocks. So is it music?
Yes.
What is it for you?
Well, first I run on coffee. Like I survive on coffee. So I would start with coffee, black coffee, or if I'm feeling fancy, maybe an almond milk latte. But fitness is really big in my life. So I might take a cycling class. I had a sports injury about a year ago, and I'm still doing some PT for that. So something like that, maybe playing volleyball or softball. And then, if nothing else, really just spending time outside, spending time with friends and family, and kind of getting, thinking about those walls that we sometimes hit in our workday, thinking about not work, trying to set that aside and then coming up with those breakthroughs on maybe Monday morning.
When you come back. All right. So last part of the show, we get to have a little fun, rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers do not have to be. Do you remember the first time that you got into trouble, like memorable trouble that you're willing to share with us?
I do. I was in third grade at the time, and it's so funny, and I'm laughing because this is like the dumbest thing to get in trouble for, but I was just starting to kind of decide as a student, did I want to apply myself? Was I going to maybe not? And so I turned in this project and I really didn't work hard on it at all. It was very sloppily thrown together. And my teacher called my parents, and then my parents sat me down and they talked to me about how they were disappointed. And so I literally got in trouble for like a bad school assignment. But I will say I can literally sort of trace back. I would say I'm a very high performing overachiever type personality now. And I can kind of trace it all the way back to that moment where I was like, I don't want them to be disappointed in me. And it's kind of scary when you think about
all the way back to third grade.
The impact a parent can have on a child. I know.
Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off? That people that listen know I journal every morning with coffee. Is there anything you do?
I would say the coffee.
Yep.
I definitely have the coffee. I'm getting into journaling a little bit more. It's kind of still new to me, but I wouldn't say I've gotten to an everyday sort of point with it yet. But what I do feel off without is some sort of activity, whether it's actually working out, going for a run, taking a walk, even. I have the occasional day where I just kind of guilty pleasure, like do nothing the entire day. But for the most part, it is the kind of activity, maybe work up a sweat somehow.
The random question, what's the best album of all time? That favorite album, the one you take with you on a desert island?
This question is really hard for me. I feel like I don't listen to a straight album all the way through anymore.
Yeah.
I will say Dermot Kennedy is one of my favorites if you have heard his album. And I want to say he's just got the one, but he might have another one that just came out. So Dermot Kennedy. Although that last album that I actually bought and listened all the way through was Taylor Swift's Reputation album.
Awesome. So Jill and I are both readers. You already mentioned one book, the Wolfpack, that we will put on the show notes, and it'll add to my stack of books I need to read. Do you have any other books that either you've gifted to others or that you just recommend that everybody should read?
Yes, I do. The last book that I've gifted, and I've gifted it a handful of times, is called Brave, Not Perfect by Reshma Saujani. And I hope I said her name correctly. She writes all about, and it's really geared again toward women. You can kind of tell women in leadership is another passion of mine, but really kind of understanding the way that we as a society expect women to behave, whether that's in the workplace. It kind of goes all the way back to childhood and, playing in the playground, boys get dirty, girls are like, I don't, and their parents kind of facilitate this too. And so it talks all about how, women can sort of step outside of that traditional, feeling of having to be perfect and take risks and be brave and experience sort of this whole new world that maybe is scary, but also really, really rewarding.
I love it. We will link to that. And I don't think I've read that one, to tell you the truth.
Oh my gosh.
I've heard of the book before. I know I have, and I've heard of her. I'm trying to think if she spoke at an event like in the past year and a half or two.
Spoke at ACUC this year, Kina's ACUC.
That's what it was. Okay. That's
right.
why I went to that session. I'm like, why is that? That sounds so familiar to me.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was at ACUC. Okay. That's fantastic. My memory's terrible. I know I've heard this, but.
Right. Where did I hear that?
As you've been moving through your career, has anything become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question is, has anything become less important?
Yeah, more important, I think, are boundaries in my life to be healthy, like actually sleeping, setting some time aside to sleep, eating well, prioritizing exercise, and kind of making sure, so boundaries would be one thing that I say is more important, and also having some impact through my work. I would be a terrible data analyst because, I would want there to be, or a data, inputter. I would want there to be so much more impact. So that would be more important. Less important, I think, is what other people think. And this is interesting because there are voices that I listen to, and there are voices that I trust, and people, give their feedback, and I'm like, yes, I want to hear that. But a lot of times in life, there just are all these contradicting voices, and they'll say completely opposite things. I mean, I've gotten the feedback to be less confident. I've gotten the feedback to be more confident. It's like it runs the whole gamut, and you're like, who do I listen to? And so I think I have said it's less important to me what the sort of mass people in my life think, and I've tuned into the right voices, mentors, people I trust, people that I respect, and kind of gather those insights.
That's awesome. The don't send question, but I know you've listened to the podcast, so you might have prepared for this one. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
If it makes you feel better, I use the first person that actually came to mind when I heard it the first time. I would say Michelle Obama, actually. And it's interesting to me because
I just downloaded her book on Audible, actually, this past week.
Gosh.
So
I am halfway through her book on Audible. I love that. It's kind of a long one, though.
We'll link to that as well. So.
Oh, perfect. Please do. Yeah, it's so interesting with Michelle because, I think for a lot of my life, I would have said being the president is really successful. And to see the way that she has really embraced success in her life from what is very different than maybe she started out her career thinking success looked like.
You were first to answer that one. So I think that's a great answer. I love that answer, personally, but it's one of my favorite questions. I absolutely love, because I think the beautiful thing about that question to me is that we all measure success differently. I love hearing what people are going to say. Thank you again, Lauren, for being on the show. We are so excited to have you on board at CUInsight and know that we are going to benefit just greatly from your leadership. The last question I have for you is do you have any final asks of our listeners today, or final thoughts you'd like to share?
My only final ask is, reach out. Always feel free. I'd love to connect with anybody who's interested in chatting or talking more about any of this, about CUInsight. And thanks so much for listening.
Well, yeah, we thank everybody. We will link to everything that we talked about in the show notes. Lauren at CUInsight on Twitter. Culp at CUInsight.com is the email. People can find you on LinkedIn and every place else if they need to get a hold of you. Do you have a preferred way?
Nope. I'm omni-channel. Any channel you want.
Any channel. Awesome. Well, thank you again. I am so looking forward to this, and thanks for taking the time today. And I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope our listeners do too.
Thanks. You too.
Talk to you all soon.